Welcome to the second day, the Singapore FinTech Festival. We are at the Luxembourg Pavilion for our Fireside Chat. I have the pleasure to have with me today Lionel Wong, who is CEO at Gprnt. Welcome, Lionel.
Thank you for having me.
So, Gprnt is right at the intersection of AI, data, and sustainable finance. How do you see artificial intelligence reshaping the financial data infrastructure that supports sustainability reporting and disclosure?
Thanks, Lorenzo. That's an interesting question. So let's walk back a bit of the history of Gprnt. So Gprnt used to be in the MAS, where we were a project. And I think we were looking at how data can be collected, made verifiable, made trusted, so that it can power sustainable finance, enable better capital flows, more efficient capital flows. And actually, I don't think we've yet to crack the data problem, if I can be honest. Right? When I started this job, it was like about 2022 back in MAS. Gprnt has undergone a transition, right? From a project, it's spun out of the MES. We're running ourselves as a private limited now with the GFTN. We still work with MES to crack that same problem, right? So when we talk about AI, we think about AI being powered in a data-rich environment. And off the back of that data richness, we can generate insights, we can generate intelligence, we can generate predictive forecasts of how we can be better in deploying sustainable finance, provided the data exists. So if we haven't solved the core problem, then a lot of this is I won't say it's a pipe dream, but there's a lot of vision, and then there's a big delta between vision and execution. So that's a harsh reality. I don't mean to be a party pooper on AI. I love the potential of it, but I think of recently 2 weeks back, Microsoft Judson Althoff was in town. So he's the CEO of their group commercial business, and he remarked that in Singapore there's such nowhere else in the world is there such a big delta between the optimism for AI and the reality check. People are also equally as skeptical. And I think I share some of that. I look at the promise, I love it. I think it will fundamentally transform the way that data is interpreted. It will greatly speed up the efficiency of how data translates into a financial outcome. But the data problem is not solved. So I get a bit worried about that.
Of course, we all know what the importance of the source, definitely. So talking about data, the ESG data landscape is often described as fragmented and inconsistent. From your perspective, what are the main challenges in building a trusted digital ecosystem for ESG data? And we have just a little bit touched the point on that. How can eventually artificial intelligence could help to address these challenges?
So, to the first question, would you mind repeating that again?
Yeah, the fact that the ESG data landscape is described as a fragmented and inconsistent. Yeah.
So the fragmentation in the landscape today, I think fundamentally is the same. And that fragmentation accrues to when we look at large corporates, and we always there was a statistic we used to throw around, like 70% of the world's emissions are attributed to the top 100 large corporates. But the reality of that, as we know, is all locked up in Scope 3. Scope 3 is up and down the value chain, up and down the supply chain. And you will always have data fragmentation if you don't get the value chain and business community on board the sustainability journey, right? That has not changed from the time that I took this job. It didn't change from the time of my predecessor for this job, and it still hasn't changed today. We still struggle with getting the business community to adopt sustainability writ large. And because of that, these guys are not putting primary data into the system. They're not doing their part, and it's no fault of theirs because sustainability looks so complex, right? The regulations in that sense, the policies and the regulations have run far ahead as opposed to the capabilities, right? And I think that's very acutely felt in Singapore. We talked about taxonomies, for instance, and that's great because the financial institutions, when they deal with their large corporate clients, they will know how to better allocate capital. But when it comes to the allocation and the tracking of that capital, right, it goes down to how do you mitigate your Scope 3, and nobody really knows. It is plausible that in time to come, when we have good data, a good solid base of data from which AI can work off, that AI will eventually be very smart in its predictive ability to say that year on year, this is the likely trajectory, and chances are the accuracy will be high. That's great because that will allow us to better track the financial related outcomes from the way that we deploy capital. But until that happens, until we have that solid database, that first cut of data that AI can work off, I don't think we're there yet, right? It's still a perennial fragmentation problem because the data simply doesn't exist.
Great, thank you very much. On a more operational angle, when you integrate AI into ESG data platforms, how do you ensure that accuracy, transparency, and explainability are there? And how, so in order to avoid this kind of black boxes that could undermine trust?
You know, this is the most difficult question to answer because there is so much hype about AI and there's so much noise around it. If you go to anybody who is doing AI today and you ask them your solution, what is the accuracy? People will tell you 95%, 99%. Then I speak to you as an adopter. When you speak to some of the banks and corporates that have tried to adopt AI, they have implemented heads of AI transformation officers. You ask them what's the actual accuracy rate. There's such a big delta. I will hear things like 10%, 20%. We're struggling to find what is the use case. It's all about procedural efficiency. We are not yet at the vision. So today there is such a tremendous delta, right? So again, expectations versus reality. Will we get to a stage where we are able to transform the black boxes into glass boxes? Honestly, I think if you engage the big techs, some of them themselves are also trying to comprehend how the boxes that they have built think, right? So it itself is a challenge for the big techs. And I also approach it from the lens of my past life as an AML regulator, right? At the end of the day, if I don't understand something as a regulator, it's very simple. I would say the onus is not on the regulator to open that black box and see it. The onus is on the user of that black box, which is the financial institution, right? So again, it goes back to, I asked my banking colleagues who are walking around at the SFF today, and they say, look, personally, look, between us, adoption, is great. Everybody's hot about it. But in terms of accuracy of how this thing translates into an outcome, 20%, right? And I don't know how to go to the regulator and tell them that because AI gets me 20% of it's like taking a taxi ride. It takes me 20% of the way there, it drops me off on the highway. And then I still have to go through crossing the other 80% using my BAU processes. Right. So that's the reality of it. And that's what worries me. I don't think we have explainability for black boxes. Not in the immediate future. I think we will get there. I also think there will be consolidation in the marketplace. Over time, it makes sense. Right. But right now it's just too hot. There's too much churn. There's too much hype.
Thank you very much. You have touched upon something very important, which is the different frameworks globally. So the EU taxonomy, the Asian taxonomy, and so on and so forth. So I would say that interoperability is really key. How can those AI-driven platforms ensure the alignment across those different frameworks, if they can?
Actually, surprisingly, Lorenzo, for this particular use case, I think it's quite straightforward. Granted, it depends on the taxonomies themselves, the way that they are worded, the way that they are crafted. And I'm also conscious that taxonomies have a quantitative aspect, but also have a qualitative aspect, and that probably is where the challenge is. But I have, even from 2-3 years back, the moment when, for Singapore, for instance, when we issued the Singapore taxonomy, right? Already there were solution providers who were already experimenting with how they can use AI, which was still not as big as it is now, but how can we create a level of automation and smartness around how we translate one taxonomy to another. So I fancy that there are solutions out there, but I also think that the outcome of it being great, if you have a taxonomy, EU taxonomy, translatable or interoperable or mappable to the Singapore Asia taxonomy, that's great. Taxonomies can now be mapped. Just like in going forward, ISSB is trying to consolidate all the different standards into one. Right? AI can help to make that translation much more quicker and more understandable for the small guy, right? But okay, so we've achieved interoperability, and then what? It's the implementation that's the challenge for me, right? And that's my BAU life, right? Working to figure out how to get companies to implement so that they can get data into the system that then verifies that these taxonomies actually work, right? So horses for courses. I think taxonomies are solvable insofar as we can create a mapping between them and use AI for that. But my day-to-day life is just focused on how do I get companies to get the data in the first instance.
Of course, we always get back to the root of these, which is data, definitely. So let's wrap up with a final question, which is more forward looking. If you look 5 years ahead, what would a fully AI enabled sustainable finance infrastructure look like, and what impact could it have on capital flows and climate action?
When I think about the 5 year ahead question, I think about that one way to look at it is from an AI standpoint. And AI standpoint, again, I referenced that very fantastic Microsoft session that I went to. They have a vision that they describe as becoming frontier, a company that is end-to-end AI, living on a data-rich ecosystem. Every single function of the company can use AI to, whether it's develop products, consult the market, do market testing, do a GTM plan, etc., even down to cybersecurity and anti-fraud, right? All of it can be AI, and that's a fantastic vision to have, right? But for me, these types of visions tend to appeal to larger companies, larger financial institutions, governments, where they're saying, this is my grand vision. For me, as Gprnt, we focus on getting the business community, which is like the smaller enterprises, 95% of most economies, into sustainability. And I think about how can we use AI for these guys to bring them in. That part is still a struggle for me because it is circular logic to say I use AI to help these guys generate data that then goes into the AI to refine it, right? So my challenge is a bit more upstream, getting the guys started on sustainability, giving them valid incentives and reasons to get started. But provided that happens, then I see AI really taking off in enabling the whole business community to be part of sustainability, to tap on sustainable finance in a much more immediate fashion, and then have a virtuous cycle in which when they're tapping on finance, they're hitting targets, they're unlocking better interest rates, and in doing so, they're building better branding, they're unlocking more incentives. So I think of how we can use AI pack that into that particular, virtuous cycle, rather than thinking more of the Microsoft vision, which is the becoming frontier, how a company can be end-to-end AI. I know there's many people who want to be AI first, but I guess I worry about that because we jump too much into something that we don't quite understand yet. So again, I don't mean to be a party pooper. I'm just worried every day about implementation.
Thank you very much, Lionel. It's good to see also from time to time, above all in this environment where there is a lot of hype around the new technologies, AI in particular. But it's always good to stay on Earth and well anchored to the day-to-day problems that we have to face.
It's terrible because my website is a .ai website.
Thanks a lot, Lionel.